There's a vast amount that plays out in the Netflix's original series Siempre a Bruja, Always a Witch, that came out during Black History Month regarding issues of slavery, witch trials, racial issues, as well as the Holy Inquisition. The show follows a teenage black slave and witch, Carmen Aguiles, from Cartagena, 1646. And while being a show about witchcraft, clearly everything cannot be based on truth, but it does include some underlying issues that were at hand during the time period. The show, being one of the only witchcraft shows following a black woman as the lead, is however still light on the slavery and Inquisition information. Images of witches have appeared in various forms throughout history, from evil wart-nosed women huddling over cauldrons to hag-faced crackling beings riding through the sky on brooms wearing pointy hats. In pulp culture, the witch has been portrayed as a benevolent, nose-twitching suburban housewife or an awkward teenager learning to control her powers in a trio of charmed sisters battling the forces of evil. The real history of witches, however, is dark and often, for the witches, deadly. Early witches were people who practiced witchcraft using magic spells and calling upon spirits for help or to bring upon change. Most witches were thought to be pagans doing the devil's work, and many, however, were simply natural healers or so-called wise women whose choice of profession was misunderstood. In the first season of the show, there's very limited information regarding her being a slave and the issues she faced in the time period, but rather her focus on her magic and concern to help others. The accuracy follows here. Carmen was condemned a witch based on her ability to work with plants and herbs for healing. She was friends with animals, but she had bewitched her master. But many people were accused of witchcraft if they were able to do more than a typical slave, like make remedies, or if such a relationship had existed between master and slave, they would be accused of being a witch and tortured until they admitted they had a relationship with the devil, or they took their own life. Carmen was taught to read and write, and this was another accusation of learning from the devil. This plays into the aspect that slaves and women were not able to know more than society provided socially acceptable. The show brings up the Spanish Inquisition, which was first established in 1478 by the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. It was intended to maintain Catholic orthodoxy in their kingdoms and replace the medieval Inquisition, which was under papal control. In practice, the Spanish Inquisition served to consolidate power in the monarchy of the newly unified Spanish kingdom, but it achieved that end through infamously brutal methods on Jews and witches. Initially, the Inquisition in Colombia was under control of the tribunal in Lima, since Colombia was part of the viceroyalty of Peru at the time. However, due to the vast area the Lima tribunal covered, a tribunal was established on February 5th, 1610 in Cartagena, Colombia. It was a prominent port where foreigners seeking to enter Spain's American possessions might be expected to land, and where it was, therefore, desirable to have means for detecting and punishing heresy. The Cartagena tribunal had jurisdiction over a vast amount of area, including the bishoprics of Cartagena, Panama, Santa Marta, Puerto Rico, Popayan, Venezuela, and Santiago de Cuba. The Palace of Inquisition, built to serve as the court and jail, was completed in 1770. There were many Jews in Cartagena and its vicinity, and they were quite visible, but often the tribunal was more involved among the inquisitors than in persecuting heretics and Jews. There were 63 processors of Jews before the tribunal in Cartagena. That indicates that they were all born in Portugal, and 9 of them were tortured, and only 1 was sentenced to serve in severe galleys sailing between Puerto Bello and Spain. While already being subjugated to killing conditions in American slave colonies, Africans faced religious and cultural persecutions as well. The Inquisition used charges of sorcery or devil worship to imprison Afro-Caribbeans. In 1620, 5 black slaves were brought to the tribunal in Cartagena of Indies from the mining town of Zaragoza, Colombia. Even before the first auto de fe ritual of public penance at Cartagena, a black man named Juan Lorenzo was tried as a sorcerer, and he put an end to his torture by hanging himself in his cell. Of the 5 women, though, 4 female defendants, Leonor, Giamar, Polonia, and Maria Linda, eventually testified to practicing diabolical witchcraft. The one man, Cosme Negro, persistently refused to testify even through physical torture. Deciding he was innocent, the inquisitors dismissed the charges against him. The trial proceedings recorded the confession by Leonor that testified against 100 blacks of different nations, witches, men, and women alive and dead, the same ones this criminal saw performing the rituals of ceremonies. Records later show that the Inquisition sentenced more Afro-Caribbean women to the stake and other penalties. In 1632, Elena de Victoria and other Africans were victimized by a witch craze in Cartagena, Colombia. One of them, Paula de Aguiles, escaped, burning because of her great skill in medicine and healing. I started reading some reviews for the show based on the first season, and many people were not favorable towards some of the inaccuracy of the storyline and representation of Black History Month. Great expectations had preceded its premiere and arisen by the trailer shown months before, in which the mere appearance of its protagonist was a rare occurrence. The splendid Afro-Colombian Angela Javiria would play the role of Carmen Aguiles, a slave accused of witchcraft and burnt alive by the Inquisition in a slave accused of witchcraft and burned alive by the Inquisition in 1646, miraculously reappearing on the beach of Cartagena in 2019. Weary of the invisibility of blacks and blackness in most Latin American TV productions, people had hoped that Always a Witch would at least start quenching the thirst of unprecedented truth and receiving global recognition. However, immediately after being launched, Always a Witch had been slammed through social media for its failure to accurately depict the black experience in Latin America, and aggravated by the coincidence of the premiere from the beginning of Black History Month. The most recurrent criticism was Carmen's unconditional devotion for Cristobal, her master's son. However, in the show, Carmen was bought by the son of a slave owner and instantly portrayed this great secret relationship between the two. Albeit in rare instances a relationship between a slave and an owner would be permitted or desirable, typically these women were rather used for pleasure than marriage. No relationship would look as it did on that screen, though. People were extremely unhappy with the interracial love aspects, and that it did very limited, brought up the fact that she was his slave and the accurate details of the life of a slave, not in love with the master. Even when she got to the future, her expected love connection was with a white man named Esteban. There was a notice of absence of black characters in the spaces frequented by Carmen. Except for her friend Daniel, there was no notable black characters at the university between students or professors. Neither of the police inspectors or owners of the colonial mansions were black. However, Carmen did encounter black Colombians when she visited the neighborhood where she was born. There, 21st century blacks remained confined, dancing, drinking, and celebrating a dark-faced saint, Virgin de la Candelaria. Every witch Carmen had encountered in past and future was white. Aldemar the Immortal was reciting a Yoruba prayer, which many viewers did not like. This later was used as a purpose and was an obstacle that she needed to face. For the first season, I thought that the show, breaking away from the interracial relationship of master and witch, was provided on a good amount of historical information. I think they were light on the details, but brought up certain distresses during the time period. And as for the relationship, it is a show, and it was most likely to give her a happy life as a slave as much as she could have had, and wanted to believe in pure love. The writers decided to move away from this relationship during the second season, though, due to the amount of negative feedback that they received. For the second season, it took a pivotal turn and started to bring attention to additional historical accuracy and information while making their viewers feel better. As for accuracy, the opening scene included pirates raiding a town in the colony. During this time, the golden age of piracy is a common designation for a time period between the 1650s and the 1730s, when maritime piracy was a significant factor in the histories of Caribbean and the United Kingdom, Indian Ocean states, North America, as well as West Africa. Even before that, Cartagena became a tempting target for all sorts of mercenaries operating on the Caribbean Sea. In the 16th century alone, Cartagena suffered 5 dreadful sieges by pirates, the most famous of which was led by Sir Francis Drake. He was the first pirate nicknamed My Pirate by Queen Elizabeth I. Drake sailed on his most famous voyage from 1577 to 1580, becoming the first English captain to circumnavigate the globe. The Battle of Cartagena was a military and naval action fought on February 1586 in recently declared Anglo-Spanish War that resulted in the assault and captive by English soldiers and sailors of the Spanish city of Cartagena, governed by Pedro de Bustos on the Spanish Main. The English were led by Francis Drake, and the raid was part of his great expedition to the Spanish New World. The English soldiers then occupied the city for over 2 months and captured much booty along with a ransom before departing on the 12th of April. War had already been officially declared by Philip II of Spain after the Treaty of Nonsuch, in which Elizabeth I had offered her support to the rebellious Protestant Dutch rebels. The Queen, through Francis Walsingham, ordered Sir Francis Drake to lead an expedition to attack the Spanish New World in a kingdom of preemptive strike. Sailing from Plymouth, England, he struck first at Santiago on November 1585, then sailed across the Atlantic on the New Year's of 1586 to the Spanish New World city of Santo Domingo in the Caribbean, which he was captured, plundered, and then extorted. The raid on Cartagena was a successful attack by the French on the fortified city of Cartagena de Indias on May of 1697 as part of the War of Grand Alliance. The city recovered quickly from the horrible takeover of Drake and kept growing, though. I could not find a pirate named Kobo, but later in the show, Carmen had traveled back to her time and freed the slaves by giving them all of their titles. And in this time, she needed help from pirates as well as the option to travel with them after. And this is based on truth. Many Africans and African Americans, both freed or enslaved, were numerous and active on board of pirate vessels. Some chose piracy because the only other option was slavery. Some black pirates were escaped slaves, and boarding a pirate vessel became a way to escape the Atlantic North undetected. I would assume this would be the same for the Caribbean. As for the circus, I searched immensely for circus and carnivals in Cartagena in the 1600s. However, I could not find anything online. Circus did not get its name and become known until the 1780s when Philip Atsley in London. But there were known Romans to have traveled around and performing, and in the show of Always a Witch, it was more considered to be a freak show. A freak show was an exhibition of biological rarities referred to in population culture as freaks of nature. Typical features would include physically unusual humans, such as those uncommonly large or small, with intersex variations, and those with extraordinary diseases and conditions. Exhibitions included live human curiosities that had appeared in traveling fairs, circuses, and taverns in England since the 1600s. These included so-called giants, dwarves, fat people, then conjoined twins, and even people from countries outside of Britain who were perceived as exotic. Freak shows were a particularly popular form of entertainment during the Victorian period when people of all classes flocked to gawp at unusual examples of human life. But it was a pastime for England in the 1700s as well. A second black character makes an appearance in the show, and with so, a different form of magical practice, very commonly known and misrepresented. Antares is a voodoo practitioner, originally to put a curse on Carmen, not knowing who she was, but to later become a love factor in her life. As mentioned in your online lectures, people who practiced it were hated and misunderstood by many due to fear and ignorance. Voodoo is a combination of Catholicism and African spiritual traditions. Many slaves descending from the Yoruba people were not permitted to worship African traditions openly, so they would give African gods the name of Catholic saints. The word voodoo is a Haitian Creole rendering of several different West African words in several West African language, including some I'm not going to try to pronounce. The word voodoo, in its basic sense, simply means spirit, so the term voodoo can be understood to mean something like spiritism. There is no official church of voodoo, no universally accepted sacred texts, and no standardized set of rituals. Voodoo can take many different forms throughout the parts of the world in which it's practiced. The roots of voodoo can be found in various indigenous religions of what is today Nigeria, Benin, and Togo in West Africa. Beginning in the 15th century, millions of indigenous people from West Africa were kidnapped, forcibly taken to the Americas and or to the Caribbean, and forced into brutal slavery. These indigenous peoples brought the religion with them, which took on different forms and influences in different parts of the America and the Caribbean. It was then later Christianized by Roman Catholic missionaries in the 16th and 17th centuries. Paula Eguiluz was very briefly brought into the show, especially for how long Carmen had searched to aim to find her. When she was finally able to transport back to her mother, it was in the middle of a chase scene, and Paula Eguiluz was a female healer African descendant in the 17th century. She was tried for witchcraft 3 times. She was well known as a healthcare practitioner in one of the largest slave cities in the New World. She had an important impact on the community of African healers. The first time Eguiluz was accused of witchcraft was around 1624. Paula's Cuban neighborhood provoked this first arrest with their shocking accusations against her, which included killing a newborn by sucking on its navel, jumping out of a window to avoid a blow from her master but suffering no injuries, practicing erotic magic, and having a pact with the devil. Gathering all of these are false. However, if she was assisting as a midwife and had indeed lost the child, she would most definitely be blamed for it. Paula explained away these serious accusations as a result from the jealousy of people who hated her because her master's love for her, as well as they saw her well dressed. All of the clothing that she had worn was new and expensive and far beyond expectations for an enslaved woman. She owned heavy wool skirts lavishly dyed in blue, scarlet, dark green, and dark gold. She also had damask skirts dyed in blue or yellow and decorative silver. The inquisitors were not going to settle with any explanation she had given unless it was her confessing she was a witch. She told a story about her witchcraft and her pact with the devil, none of which was true, but it was what the inquisitors wanted to hear. She was charged with witchcraft and had to be whipped around 200 times in public streets and served 2 years in the general hospital. Her second trial was in 1632, and she was suspected of continuing her practice of witchcraft as a healer. Paula took advantage of her taste of freedom, earning her income as a healer and washerwoman, as well as taking part in passionate love affairs and socializing with other Afro-Caribbean women who dealt in erotic magic, powders, remedies, and possibly witchcraft. As a tradition in Cartagena and other cities in the Iberian Peninsula in Spanish America, due to a popular interest in manipulating emotions and sexuality via potions and spells, women of a variety of social classes and nationalities gathered to confer and support one another in the efforts and relationships with men. One of the people Paula de Eguiluz tried to heal was Bishop Perez. He was a very wealthy man and had a competitive job in the New World. However, even with his money, he chose to have Eguiluz heal his sickness. Peruz did not care about her ideals or beliefs. He just wanted her to help him. He kept seeing her and having her try to heal him, even though there were social issues with their relationship. This shows how much he believed in her ability to help. The couple wanted to be free from all worries, yet they were found and she died from a fire at the stake. For the second season, there were many mixed reviews about Always a Witch. One of the first decisions that the writers made was to not only cut off Carmen's relationship with her owner, but also address the fact she was his slave. He wanted to return to an earlier time when everything was easier, he says, and she replied, "I was your slave." It is the first time in the show she acknowledges the truth about the relationship that progresses the season one, and perhaps reason enough for viewers who wrote off Siempre Bruja to reconsider the program. It's still groundbreaking for the centering of a black witch and engaging the actual history of Afro-Colombians persecuted during the Cartagena Inquisitions. At the end of the day, people must still like the show since they've been requesting for additional seasons. My thoughts is that, again, the backstory does not break too far from historical accuracy. However, I think that the season, while representing new information of Cartagena's history, was more derived on creating a female activist beloved by the viewers. They shaped and defined her character a lot more in this season. But all in all, it was a good portrayal of the time era in different stages in life in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries in comparison to modern day.